Good afternoon, welcome to all in person and at home, and thank you for joining our lecture this afternoon on International Women's Day, or for many Christians, the Nativity of Our Lady, the birthday of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So our lecture this afternoon is a continuation, if you will, of the presentation on diversity in Christian art from last year. But I will limit our presentation to Christian-related imagery, only 2D images, non-animated, so no cartoons in the sense of take-a-films or GIFs. Those who have a religious theme or framework or vocabulary, which aim at making you laugh, making you think, provide you with information, shock you, or even deliberately insult you or your group. So we will be encountering propaganda in various forms, satire and parody, blasphemy, and a debate on hate speech versus freedom of speech. All this has proliferated, has been enlarged with the advent and the use of the internet, and that is why we mostly will be engaging with that particular platform. Trigger warning. That's the nice thing to do these days. You may find some of these images disturbing or upsetting or insulting. We're all adults. Don't say I didn't warn you. I'll leave it at that. That's one example. I quite like this one. You can interpret it any way you want. So, first quote by Chesterton. Chesterton, I don't know if you know, this is the author of the Father Brown Mysteries, which are now on BBC First, I believe. It is a test of good religion whether you can joke about it. Next quote by Worth. Religion is the broadest, most elaborate, and most influential art movement in human history. Worth also intimates that, in his opinion, religion will only survive as an art form. And of course, every art and every artist has its fans, and fans can be intense. This is from a blog by Voyager, so I guess it won't be entirely wrong to consider followers of any religion as a fandom of that particular religion. So, religion, art, and humor. Those are our three ingredients for today. Let's start with a bit of a timeline, just some historical background. All the definitions are from the Cambridge Online Dictionary. So cartoon, as we know it today, both in drawn, designed form and in moving form, comes from the Renaissance time, where in thick paper, cardboard, or the predecessor of cardboard, artists would use to outline their drawings. Sometimes they would even stick needles in, like pounce it, so that they had the outline, and then they would start adding colors and details. Now, of course, afterwards, the Gutenberg press, the first possibility to spread news, opinions, pictures, texts on a very mass, not mass-produced as in our days, but definitely mass-produced compared to monks drawing everything by quill on parchment. And that meant that ideas were spread a lot quicker over a larger geographical area. And especially in the Reformation, which sort of overlaps with that period, you get the first what they call caricatures. And a caricature is a drawing or written, spoken description of someone that usually makes them look silly, but by making their appearance or part of their appearance or character more noticeable than it really is. With that comes propaganda, especially when both sides, and in both sides I mean Catholic and mostly Lutheran, and later on Reformed as well, start insulting each other. Because by insulting each other, you undermine a person's credibility in the debate. So propaganda are information, ideas, opinions, or images, often only giving one part of an argument, that are broadcast, published, or in some other way spread with the intention of influencing people's opinions. Now fast forward to the 18th and 19th century, and then we get something very interesting, and very political, which is satire. It was hugely popular in Britain, the Pickwick Papers. And satire is a way of criticizing people or ideas in a humorous way, especially in order to make a political point or a piece of writing that uses this style. But that's still something different from parody, which is more copying a particular situation or making the features or qualities of the original more noticeable. Parody is to have fun, satire is to criticize. By the end of the 19th century, both formats, so non-animated and animated, have become established formats. The only thing that needs to be done now is to basically perfect or refine the technique. And then we go from drawing to moving to computer, CGI, etc. Oh, sorry. So by the 1990s, we have a way of distributing these images, unseen. It's never happened before, not even with the printing press. That's the internet, the World Wide Web. And with that come its own problems, its own issues, its own possibilities, the good and the bad and the ugly, but also its own language, technical language, and its own vocabulary, if you will. So we get this word meme, which is one of the things we'll be concentrating on today, which comes from memetics, and which basically is a term derived from biology. It's meant to be a cultural feature or type of behavior that is passed from one generation to another without the influence of genes. Genes, not the thing you wear, but genes as in DNA. So basically what it means is it's passed on because everybody understands the background of it. We'll talk about that in a little while, a bit more. You get the emoji from emoticon, which is a digital image that expresses an idea or a feeling or sort of nuances a text. You get the pictogram, any emergency exit sign is a pictogram. And you get the GIF, which is a graphic interchange format. Basically, that's a moving meme. We won't be discussing those. When it comes to humor and images and art and satire and the whole combination, it's not something that's really new. This is what they call the Alexamenos graffiti. And it is thought, it's believed to depict, for the very first time, not just the crucifixion, but the crucifixion of Christ. And that has to do with the fact that the person being crucified is depicted with a donkey head. Donkey head in Roman times was a specific way to insult Jews and then later Christians. Now, this is of course satire, but it's also propaganda. And it's aimed against a very specific group. Second one. Saint Nicholas of Myra, better known as Sinterklaas, bitch slaps, probably one of the first church bitch slaps in history, Arius at the Council of Nicaea in 325. These are from frescoes in a monastery in Trabzon, which is modern-day Turkey. The image is actually not meant to be funny, because Nicholas, St. Nicholas, was put under arrest after this happened, and we know it happened. Well, at least there are multiple sources that say that it happened, for the duration of the rest of the council, because by doing this, he ignored imperial guidelines. Constantine the Great had said, you can all come together, we will discuss this, but I don't want any violence. And of course, Sinterklaas, Santa Claus, Father Christmas, was put in jail, or at least in house arrest. Now, church history is one of the best sources of these memes. This is an own creation. I don't know if people saw the Academy Awards last year. Perhaps if you didn't, then this doesn't tell you much, but we'll get back to that. Fast forward to the Reformation, like I said, with the whole mass media, the printing press, propaganda, satire. Okay. Here you have what is known as the seven-headed Luther. And it's a caricature, like I said, it serves to undermine a person's morality, usually sexual morality, integrity, trustworthiness, and credibility. And therefore, now this isn't a good person, so therefore there must be a heretic, right? On the other side, from England, this is from James Fox's Book of Martyrs. And this is Edward VI, Henry VIII's boy, who is cleansing the church from idols, and the papists are fleeing away with their imagery. The irony is that this is iconoclasm depicted. So, another one that's a bit older. The 19th century Spain, this is a painting in Malaga in the City Museum. And this is still very good-natured. I mean, the monks are laughing about the situation, and the donkey's not cooperating, and dog, and funny. Now, one of the things that memes does is take existing imagery and just add a title. I see a lot of people frowning. The name of the rose, anyone? Okay, we'll leave it at that. Now, this type of, so this is all very good humor, but this is a bit more serious. This is from an anti-religious point of view. This is, the Russian one is from the Bezbožnik, which means the atheist, and the Chinese one, I'm not going to even attempt on pronouncing. This is from the Red Guard. And these are posters from the USSR and from communist China, not just depicting their philosophy or their political ideas, but I'll just indicate them. I don't know if they're very clear, but basically the Chinese gentleman is stepping on an imagery of Buddha. The Russian ones are putting Jesus on a skip, and the one in the back is hammering down church bells. So it's not just about their own ideas, it's anti someone else's ideas. This is more recent, 21st century. Graphic novels or comic books are a multi-million-dollar business, especially these type of things, you know, the Rapture, Jesus as a superhero. Why is this propagandist? Because in most cases, Jesus is a white superhero. One more thing I would just like to say in between. This is from an Instagram page by a preacher, Frank Kraus, who's a German pastor. And on this page, he combines, like I said, existing images from modern culture with biblical texts. Not just for the humorous effect, but also to get people acquainted with the scriptures. So obviously this is, in German it's Simpson, but it's Samson, as we would say, Samson and the Lion, Judges 14, but really it's from Captain America, from Marvel, all the films and comic books and all that. All this to illustrate that you need to be up to date with your cultural references to get all this done. I would even venture to argue that if you're not on social media as a theology student, you're missing out on a lot. So if you know, you know. If ever you see that in a tweet or a message, it means it's a kind of joke. It basically means that everybody knows what we're talking about or what we're referencing, and those that don't, well, that's too bad. Without the information about the context or the original story, a joke or the intention of one of these images can be missed entirely. Pop culture references are hugely important in this type of theologizing, but also evangelization in its own subtle, not so subtle way. So let's have a look at how, in modern perspectives, this is done. So you can take a known image, an image that everybody really should know, unless they live under a rock. and just change the graphics, like the diversity in art that we talked about last year. Now this is Michelangelo, the Sistina, God creating Adam. In this case, it's by Harmonia Rosales from 2017, and of course, not only is it a woman, but it's also a woman of color. There's a white version by Ruth Schreiber. And then the idea behind it is to stop thinking about God only in male terms or cisgender male terms. What you can also do is take a known image and add text to make a point. Now you have to know 2 Bible stories in order to know what this is talking about. I don't know who that is, by the way. Those are the lepers, and that's the Samaritan who comes back. I don't know who that is. So an existing image repurposed. Now you can also start combining images. Now you need to know your pop culture and your liturgy, because else this makes no sense. By the way, who can tell me when the holy day for Star Wars is? 4th of May. You can use themes that are known to make up a new story to look at things from a different perspective. Now, the wise women are pretty obvious, but the wise men in this picture actually are only clear because of the 3 gifts. Of course, it's also a commentary on e-commerce. This one, that clicks immediately. This one you might have to think a bit further. You can use the standard cartoon. Oh, this is another one. Happy Easter, of course. Or you use the standard cartoon, bande dessinée, stripverhaal. Interesting is with Radio Free Babylon, they always put text explanation at the bottom, which is a very Reformation thing to do. A lot of the Reformation artists did that with their paintings as well. You can use pictograms or emojis to talk about something. Of course, this is a criticism on all male theology, or what is known as macho theology. Or, like I said, church history. Church history is fun. That needs an apostrophe, but okay. So all these are good-natured, they're light-hearted. So let's push the boundaries a little bit. Let's use recognizable themes, setups, to comment from religion onto society. Because that happens as well, because it works both ways. Huh? This is the winner of one of the cartoon festivals. Basically, Jesus on the crucifix is yawning because he's not impressed by what he's seeing in the marital bed. So you need to know your liturgy and you need to know your popular literature. It's Lord of the Rings. What I do like about this is an ecumenical wedding. At the vestments. It can also comment on certain religious people and their behavior. There's always one of those in each parish. Or these ones. I always say, I didn't know he was missing, but okay. Or the rivalry of religion. The beauty of these things is that they often come from artists and they often have subtext that is very respectful of faith. It's just they don't like institutionalized religion. That's the problem they see, and that's the problem they want to denounce. Just a general commentary on society, obviously. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Or to comment on current affairs. COVID was a veritable treasure trove of needs. It was fun. But if you don't know Da Vinci's Last Supper, it doesn't mean much. For some reason, the Magi were always in there, because there's 3 of them. And at one point, it could only be 2 people visiting in a hospital, 2 people visiting. So, the Magi were there. Zoom and Teams, I mean, we all learned how to do it. And of course, at one point we couldn't go to church or very limited. Again, if you don't know when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, doesn't go anywhere. Okay, let's take it another step further and discuss everyone's favorite taboo when it comes to art, religion, and humor, namely blasphemy. So, believe it or not, this is from 2020, some EU member states still have blasphemy laws on the books. And they're not just the Catholic ones, Italy, Spain, Germany, for example, has blasphemy laws. And we discussed, I don't know if you remember last year when I showed the image of the Madonna, the Polish Madonna with the rainbow halo, and people were actually taken to court. Now they were acquitted, but the whole idea of that being considered blasphemous and that being such an issue that you go to court, which takes time and money and effort and resources, for us over here seems quite spurious. But there are EU member states today that still have those laws. Now, blasphemy is defined as injurious speech. So speech that hurts you. Of course, it's broader than just the spoken word. It's irreverent and contemptuous, and usually deliberate, an attitude or action towards someone or something being held sacrosanct. It is in many, or not most cases, a matter of opinion, a matter of interpretation. A lot depends on context, purpose and the target audience, but also the format and the materials used. Another definition is the use of language, or especially the purposeful use of language, imagery, or movements that are shocking to others or mocking of accepted beliefs. Now, in this blasphemy debate, freedom of religion clashes often with freedom of expression, usually in the form of humor in general and satire or parody more specifically, and with the freedom of press. All three freedoms are guaranteed by the Belgian Constitution and the European and Human Rights Conventions. Last semester in the Art, Religion and Theology module, we did a little exercise. So I showed images to students and asked them to spontaneously react, whether it was blasphemy or not, and then explain why. So first, instinctively, emotively, and then rationally. So we did that, and the questions we concluded from that exercise were, who decide what is blasphemy? And usually that's the majority, or the religious majority. Who decides when it's blasphemy? Judge, jury, or mob rule? And who decides what the appropriate response or punishment should be for blasphemy? Now, the defenders will say that humor has no limits, no bounds, else it would amount to censorship or self-censorship. Others object that not everything needs to be expressed or depicted or explained. It only stirs things up, and it pits one group within society against another. Some insist that blasphemy only targets certain religious communities and that it amounts to slander and even hate speech. This is from 2006. Could be any religious tradition, really. Or, let's say, could be any branch of religion, really. So the Muhammad cartoons were posted first in 2005, so the year before this, in Julian's Posten. And then they were taken on by Charlie Hebdo in 2011 and 2012. So the question it raises is one religion or philosophy or lifestyle more sensitive to blasphemy than others? I.e., do adherents of that tradition react quicker, sooner, more actively against what they perceive as blasphemy? Some adherents of one religion decry that they are being targeted, persecuted without ramifications. I mean, the whole thing in the US every Christmas, you know, happy holidays, that whole debate every single time, for example. Unlike other religions that are being left alone out of fear, perhaps, not necessarily respect. In the aftermath of the murder of Samuel Paty, a French school teacher who had shown the infamous Muhammad cartoons in his class on freedom of speech in 2020, Nicolas Brouwer, the traditionalist Roman Catholic Bishop of Tarbes and Lourdes, wrote in an open letter, and this is my own translation from the French, "Nonetheless, I dare ask the question, is it necessary in order to illustrate freedom of expression to continue and show caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad to students?" Now, my own instinctive caveat or remark with this is, does this not amount to victim blaming? implying that the victims of anti-blasphemy reaction, violence, terrorism have brought it upon themselves. Does this not imply that certain topics are off limits always and everywhere, especially when educating or informing people, specifically minors, pupils, or students? Because what if anti-blasphemy laws are being used, as they are, as a political tool or to settle an argument? What if blasphemy laws happen to be the one thing that encroaches on the freedom of religion, especially the freedom of religion of religious minorities, or branches within a religion that have differences of interpretation? Should there even be laws on blasphemy and anti-blasphemy? Or should the courts decide on a case-by-case situation based on existing laws against the incitement to hatred or violence, or slander and defamation of character? Okay, so let's push the envelope a bit further. Double, triple trigger warning. This is by an artist called Marilyn Artus in 2012, and it's titled "The Lady of Nazareth Chose to Play Along." Its nickname is BDSM Madonna. Now, it has a coat hanger, a crucifix, a chastity belt. So it's clearly a criticism against the majority church denomination of the planet, not just on its abortion stance, for example, but also the position of women in leadership roles, or the lack thereof. The beauty of the internet is that thing and the difficulty. Things move very quickly. Sometimes it's very difficult to keep up. It can be very overwhelming. It's good to shut it off occasionally for your own mental health. But things happen in the world, and 5 minutes later, you have a meme online. Now, this is a criticism on the late Bishop of Rome and his position on ethical questions, but also the cover-up of sex scandals. Now, for a lot of people, I can imagine if you're a Roman Catholic, that this isn't the nicest thing to be seen. Although I know a lot of Roman Catholics who would think this is really, really funny as well. So that's the problem with these anti-blasphemy rules. As Richard Moon writes, religious beliefs often have public implications and so must be open to criticism that is deeply felt and sometimes very harsh. Yet it is unclear how the state is to determine when the experience of offense is sufficiently great that the speech ought to be restricted. In his, this is also a blog, Moon points out that different religious traditions have different obligations for those in and outside the religion when it comes to respecting the sacred. Different branches have different rules, and different individuals have a different stance, a different take on these obligations. He also writes, the standard for the restriction of criticism cannot be based simply on the reactions or feelings of adherents or their report of their feelings. Basically, what he's trying to say is, in a court of law, you need to prove that you're being discriminated against, that you are being defamed, that you're being slandered. To say that you feel that way, or perceive that way, or interpret that way, isn't enough. Now, like I said, the internet, everything goes a million times faster and a million times further. And so we saw that the internet started really in 1990, 1991. Already in 1994, these two researchers argued in their critical work, Unthinking Eurocentrism, the following. The contemporary media shape identity. Indeed, many argue that they now exist close to the very core of identity production. In a transnational world typified by the global circulation of images and sounds, goods and people, the media deterritorialize the process of imagining communities. So the internet has had a huge impact on our society. And already in 1994, these authors described the media not only as an identity marker, but also an identity maker. The mainstream historic churches, even if they took a big step forward during the pandemic, because they had to, are still lagging behind in comparison to other groups or religious groups in their use of the internet. P.J. Heron in 2015 has already envisioned this, and this is titled A Religious War in 2250, so in 200 years from when he was designing this. So it's Twitter versus Facebook. And it's not just the media where the war, the discussion, the debate happens. It's the social media as religions themselves, as religious traditions themselves. So religious humor or art can be very blasphemous, depending on opinion. But it can also be very dangerous. It can accuse, it can be injurious, and it can be very, very propagandist. I think I showed this one last time as well. This is from the book of Daniel. So it's religious Photoshop presented as a socio-ethical stance. And a very unfortunate phenomenon related to this is what they call trolling, or the act of leaving an insulting message on the internet in order to annoy someone. It's very reluctant, it's very repetitive, it's constant. Often by using multiple fake online profiles or personae, trolling happens intensively and in a targeted manner. It has intensified the debate on free speech, incitement of hatred, misinformation, and the power and responsibility of big tech. The anonymity of the internet is one of the reasons why this is so problematic. There are, in most cases, no consequences. Speaking of trolling and propaganda, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, this is from 2022, so Russia is the protector of the faithful against everything that the West stands for. This is from the Twitter feed of the Russian embassy in Bangladesh. For some reason, the Russian embassy in Bangladesh, its Twitter feed is a cesspool. I mean, it's full of this. I don't know why Bangladesh, maybe because there are no rules there, but it is full of it. Now, of course, if you do that, you should be able to expect that. So this is where the reaction. So don't expect a debate, although a debate in an invasion is a bit superfluous. But there's always reaction and anti-reaction. At this point, I would like to circle back to the commentary from religion onto society. Again, a double and triple trigger warning. Now, the message here is the poor lambs, the school children, being sacrificed, if you will, for political gains by gun and Second Amendment enthusiasts in mass school shootings. And you might think that these two images belong together, and they could. This is still quite relatable. However, I put them together to explain something that is called framing. So they're from different content creators from different times, and I put them together to make the point. Framing is to carefully plan or organize ideas, suggestions, methods, etc. in a particular way. I've not changed anything in the images themselves. I've just put them together, and by purposefully combining them, I created a new context, a new background, a new emphasis. Because the first image is from a whole series, it's called Los Intocables by Eric Ravelo from 2013. And there's a whole series of crucifixion scenes whereby children are crucified on the back of an adult who hurts them or at least does not care about their well-being. So, for example, there is one of clearly a priest where a child is crucified, clearly a tourist, sex holiday where the child is crucified, and so on and so forth. The second image is from 2010, so there's 3 years in between. This is just the Lamb of God, regular, if you will, Easter, Good Friday icon in a sort of modern style, because of course the Lamb that died for the entire world. So the one image is indeed about mass school shootings, and especially a criticism against the trope of thoughts and prayers, which you always hear afterwards. And the other is just a biblical phrase, drawn, pictured. Framing is suggesting that an image, a word, a person, an act means one thing, while the context actually intends to convey something else. So by changing the context, even partially, I was able already to create a different sentiment, even if the message itself sort of stands. But by choosing to include or combine or even rework images, one is able to limit, frame, literally, the information provided, or seduce audiences or viewers to a conclusion away from reality. This is why fact-checking is so important. Okay. Another thing is using known themes to comment from religion on religion. This happens a lot with people who are deconstructing their own religious backgrounds. And deconstruction means the unlearning of previously held religious beliefs from within the faith tradition, usually publicly breaking rank and criticizing the group a person formerly belonged to. This is by one of my personal favorites. It's a cartoonist and painter called David Hayward, aka Naked Pastor, who used to be a preacher in a, let's say, more evangelically leading denomination, and he broke away from that, and his work challenges the status quo and deconstructs dogma. So of course here is talking about misogyny. Homo and transphobia, but also systemic racism. So the brown Jesus needs to put on a white suit in order to be accepted in a church. We talked about white Jesus last year in the famous. Something more political. Gun control, for example. Or the politicization, Christian nationalism. Of course, you need to be up to date with your news facts in order to really be able to read these things. So, to end, some possible conclusions. Humor in religious art or art with a religious theme or using religious vocabulary is a sensitive matter, a disturbing matter. But theology and religious studies as a whole also deal with sensitive, disturbing matters. So again, I'm framing because these two images weren't actually published together. Now, they do fit like a cartoon, if you will, and this is quite innocent. I like to post this on the 31st of October every year. When I see ghosts and pumpkins passing on my newsfeed, I like to add that. But like we saw before, framing can be a lot more problematic and a lot more propagandist. Art uses all of its means, materials, tools, and ideas available to it, and it can go very extreme. And very often art is the place where new techniques, formats, etc. are either invented or applied or refined or further developed. Art as a happening all through art history, religious art as a religious happening all through religious history. This has also brought conflict at those times when art was or is used in an iconoclast, blasphemous, satirical, and even propagandist way. The debate on individual and corporate responsibility, human rights and free speech, and the hierarchy is very intense. And seeing as religion and theology are often the subject or even target, perhaps they should take more of a lead in the conversation rather than self-preservation and usually self-pity, this sort of self-martyrdom that you find in a lot of Christian corners that doesn't do anything for the conversation. Perhaps we could posit that in the history of the relationship and tension between art, religion, and theology, with the added ingredient of humor, constant renewal and reinvention are the most persistent themes, very often pushing the boundaries. Thank you very much.
Ik denk dat ze het gewoon af kunnen sluiten.
Okay, in that case, we can close this session. I can send everyone, or people who are interested, I can send you the text, I can send you the PowerPoint, and if any questions or to Kathleen, any questions or comments pop up, we'll do it via email. That's fine too. That's what it's there for. See you. Bye-bye.